The obsidian throne room of King Derek, carved from a mountain peak and perpetually shadowed, felt less like a seat of power and more like a mausoleum for emotion. Derek, king of the Crimson Moon Pack, reigned with a cold, absolute silence that was more terrifying than any roar. His eyes, the metallic gold of a winter moon, tracked the supplicants and guards with an unnerving, calculating precision. For 10 years, he had been the solitary Iron Fist, ruling a kingdom of 3 million werewolves, his heart a weapon and his instincts dulled to everything but power. He thought himself immune, not just to threats, but to the weakness of connection. The idea of a mate was a ludicrous fairy tale for lesser wolves, a vulnerability he had long trained his inner wolf to despise. This morning's business was routine, the public sentencing of a traitorous beta. The air was thick with tension and the stale scent of fear and ozone, typical of a large, high-ranking crowd. Derek, cloaked in his midnight blue king's robes, leaned back, his muscular frame taut as a drawn bowstring. He gave the curt, final command: banishment, and stripped the pack mark. Let him face the wilds alone. A chorus of subservient growls and murmurs followed the king's decree, but Derek was already turning. The political theater concluded. He took one step toward the private exit, his mind cataloging the micro-expressions of his court. Who flinched? Who was too eager? It was in that split second of analysis that the world shattered around him. A scent, as sharp and pure as frost and as sweet as untamed honey, cut through the oppressive air. It was a fragrance that didn't just register on his senses. It hit the back of his throat like a potent drug, searing a direct line to the coiled, lethal core of his wolf. It was an anomaly, a siren song in the barren landscape of his soul, and for the first time in his reign, King Derek was forced to stop. His golden eyes flared, a primal heat radiating from him that caused the assembled betas and warriors to instinctively drop their heads and lower their shoulders in submission. Mine. The raw, guttural thought ripped through the king's disciplined mind, a savage whisper that was all instinct and no reason. He hated it. He hated the dizzying wave of possessiveness, the sudden clawing need to find the source of the intoxicating essence. It felt like a violation. Who? His voice was a low, resonant rumble, an earthquake in the stone room. Is that? His head guard, Ron, a formidable warrior with granite eyes, hesitated, clearly fighting the urge to shield his scent in fear. My king? I do not detect a threat. Not a threat, Derek corrected, the coldness of his tone now edged with a dangerous, barely contained hunger. The scent. Bring me the source of the scent. Ron frantically scanned the ranks, his brow furrowed in confusion, before his eyes fell on a small, huddled form near the back wall, almost invisible amidst the much larger, high-ranking pack members. It was a young woman, barely 5 feet tall, draped in a plain, threadbare tunic, looking utterly terrified. She wasn't an aristocrat or a courtier. She was a servant, a cleaning girl, perhaps. But even in her state of obvious destitution, her scent was luminous. She was Lyah, an Orphan Omega, the lowest rung on the pack ladder, invisible to all, yet now the absolute, undeniable center of the most powerful being in the kingdom. Derek took 2 predatory strides, his king's scent, all oak, iron, and a hint of fresh blood, suffocating her in its dominance. He didn't even need to be told her rank. The pathetic way she shrank from his approach, her delicate wrists clasped over a trembling chest, screamed her subjugated status. Her eyes, the color of wet earth, flickered up to his, wide and luminous with fear. His wolf howled, a desperate, silent plea for her. His king mind recoiled in absolute fury. An Omega, an orphan, a nothing. I am the king. I cannot be bonded to this poverty of a mate. The conflict was instant, agonizing and absolute. But the need was a hot, molten river, burning through his icy control. His hand shot out, not to touch her, but to brace his palm against the cold stone of the wall right next to her head, trapping her body against the formidable stone. He loomed over her, his eyes blazing, drinking in the fear-laced, sweet scent that was now his only air. "Your name," he commanded, his voice a low growl that vibrated through her small frame. Lyah squeezed her eyes shut, unable to speak, the sheer magnitude of his aura paralyzing her. She knew the king was a god of wrath, untouchable and unfeeling. And now she was beneath his scrutiny, a speck of dust in his hurricane. Her fear was palpable, but beneath it, a tiny, unfamiliar spark of something, a responsive, instinctive pull toward his power, made her breath hitch.
Derek's wolf thrashed inside him. It demanded he throw her over his shoulder, carry her to his private chambers, and plunge his teeth into the soft, unblemished skin of her neck, marking her for all eternity. It demanded he destroy anyone who dared look at her. "Open your eyes, Omega," Derek growled, his hand trembling with the force of his restraint. "You belong to me now. Tell me your name." The very air crackled with the sheer, terrifying force of a ruthless king's primal, unwanted claim. The court watched, horrified, as their feared king was captivated by a girl whose existence they had forgotten. The suspense was a coiled snake, ready to strike, its drama rooted in the horrifying knowledge that Lyah, the lowliest of the low, was now the catalyst for a political firestorm that could consume them all. Lyah opened her mouth, a small, scared noise escaping, the sweetness of her fear only making his primal urge worse. The game had changed, and the king had just lost his iron control. Chapter 2. The Cage of Command. Lyah's voice was barely a whisper, a delicate sound lost in the vastness of the throne room. "Lyah, your majesty." Derek didn't move. The world held its breath. His gaze was a physical weight, peeling back her layers of fear, exhaustion, and hunger, revealing the pure, intoxicating soul scent beneath. He could see the tremble in her lips, the pulse frantic in the slender column of her throat, and the sight ignited a possessive fire he hadn't known he was capable of. His own wolf, usually a stoic, silver beast of iron will, was pacing the cage of his mind, its golden eyes fixed on her. He finally pulled his hand from the stone, the scraping sound of his thick nail against the granite startling her. The king stepped back, a move that should have been a release, but only made the space between them feel more charged, more dangerous. "Ron," Derek commanded, his eyes never leaving Lyah's. "Clear the court. Now." The speed and ferocity of the dismissal were unprecedented. Within minutes, the vast throne room was empty save for the three of them. Ron stood a respectable distance, his beta senses on high alert, concern etching his face. He'd served Derek for years, and had never seen his king's carefully constructed facade crack like this. "Lyah." Derek repeated her name, testing the sound, finding it too soft, too vulnerable. "You are an Orphan Omega. You have no pack affiliation, no standing. Yet you carry my scent." Lyah flinched at the word Omega, a brand of her low birth. She finally found her voice, a small, desperate plea. I do not know what you mean, King Derek. I have tried to mask my scent. I swear I meant no disrespect to your territory." He let out a low, humorless chuckle that sent a shiver down her spine. "Mask your scent? Your scent is the very air I now breathe. It's what my wolf has been starving for, though I would have starved it to death first." He strode toward her again, the movement fluid and predatory. He reached out a hand, his fingertips brushing the sensitive skin of her forearm. The contact was a shockwave. Lyah gasped, her entire body arching a millimeter toward his heat, an instinct she couldn't control. The king's eyes darkened further, a raw, almost animalistic pleasure flickering in their depths. The primal reaction was a confirmation of the mate bond, and it slammed into Derek, obliterating his last vestiges of cool indifference. "I can't reject a bond," he muttered, the words torn from him, a confession of weakness that only she would ever hear. The pain would compromise my rule. I will not have my sovereignty questioned by a biological inconvenience. He grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly gentle, yet utterly firm. You will be housed in the Obsidian Tower. No one is to know of your existence. You are not a Luna. You are a secret, a possession, my wolf's weakness, which I will turn into my strength. A secret. Lyah stammered, his body heat and scent clouding her thoughts. She saw his struggle, the sheer, ruthless need warring with the pride of a king. She knew instinctively that to be a secret was dangerous, but to be his public mate was a death sentence. The massive, carved doors of the throne room swung open, and a sleek, tall figure entered. It was Kaelen, the Beta-Elite of the Royal Guard, a woman whose ambition was as sharp as her silver-edged armor. Her eyes were a cold, assessing gray, and she paused, instantly sensing the wrongness in the air, the confusing mix of Derek's iron will scent and the sweet, Orphan Omega. My king, Kaelen said, her voice smooth but laced with challenge. The court is dismissed, but I detect an unauthorized scent, and Ron has not left your side. Her eyes narrowed on Lyah, a flicker of pure, territorial hatred visible. Derek didn't release Lyah. If anything, his grip tightened, a silent declaration of ownership. The tension in the room ratcheted up, a sudden, suspenseful drama played out for the soul of the king. Kaelen, Derek's voice was like grinding stone. You detect nothing. This is a matter of pack security. This girl is a recent acquisition, a prisoner with information regarding the Northern Rogues. She is to be housed and questioned under my personal protection. It was a lie, a dangerous one, making Lyah a target for anyone seeking to undermine the king. Kaelen bowed, but her eyes held a spark of knowing, an instinct that betrayed the king's lie. As you command, my king. I trust she will not be a distraction to your duties. The king's wolf surged, a low, murderous growl vibrating deep in his chest. The threat. She sensed the threat. Derek didn't dignify the remark with a response. He simply pulled Lyah closer, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. You see your position, Lyah? You are a dangerous secret in a nest of vipers. Any move to escape, any whimper of your existence, and I will be forced to make a choice. A choice my king mind may win. He didn't need to finish the threat. The implication, that his king mind would rather execute her than compromise his power, was brutally clear. He then pushed her, not unkindly, toward Ron. Ron, see her to the tower. Do not leave her side. If a single hair on her head is harmed, I will hold you personally responsible. As Lyah was led away, she glanced back. Derek stood alone in the center of the vast, cold room, his powerful shoulders rigid, his golden eyes fixed on the empty space where she had been. He looked less like a king and more like a predator who had finally cornered his difficult, dangerous prey. The primal tension hummed between them, an undeniable, steamy promise of a conflict that would be fought not with swords, but with teeth and raw, agonizing need. Chapter 3. Midnight's Unsanctioned Touch. The Obsidian Tower was a fortress of silence, a circular chamber at the highest point of the castle, overlooking the king's sprawling domain. Lyah, confined within its stone walls, felt the weight of her predicament pressing down on her. The room was luxurious, yet was a cage, and the bars were the king's absolute power. Her only company was Ron, stationed silently outside the heavily reinforced door, and the omnipresent, suffocating scent of King Derek, which seemed to cling to the velvet drapes and polished stone. Exhausted from the fear and the overwhelming mental pressure of the mate bond, a silent, humming tension that thrummed between her and the king, Lyah found her fear slowly morphing into a cold, defiant determination. She was an Omega, yes, but she had survived as an orphan for years. She would not simply become a caged pet. That night, while the moon was hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds, Lyah acted. She found a loose stone near the hearth, not large enough for an escape, but heavy enough to create a sound. With a sudden burst of desperation, she hurled the stone against the single, arched window, hoping the clatter would draw attention, even if it was just Ron's. She didn't want escape. She wanted a confrontation, a way out of the suffocating secrecy. The moment the stone shattered the glass, a raw, terrifying growl echoed through the tower's stone corridors, a sound that spoke of pure, unadulterated territorial rage. It wasn't Ron. It was Derek. He burst into the room not a second later, not through the door, but via the high, shattered window, a whirlwind of black robes and lethal muscle. He moved like a striking serpent, his eyes glowing brighter than the gold of his wolf's irises, burning with a frightening intensity. His hands were instantly on her, gripping her arms, not gently, but not to harm. It was a raw, instinctive claim, designed to ground her, to stop her panicked flight. "What in the name of the moon do you think you are doing?" he snarled, his wolf's voice layered over his own, the sound vibrating into her bones. Lyah, despite the overwhelming aura of danger, looked up at him with newfound, desperate courage. "You keep me here like a prisoner, a hidden shame. I will not be your secret." Before he could answer, a second noise, louder than the shattered glass, erupted from the hallway outside the tower door. The clash of steel on steel, followed by Ron's sharp, pain-filled grunt. Derek's head snapped toward the door. His eyes, fixed on Lyah only a moment ago, now held a cold, murderous focus for the external threat. His grip on her loosened. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice suddenly stripped of all emotion, returning to the absolute king. He moved with blinding speed. He didn't open the door. He kicked it off its hinges with a single, massive blow, vanishing into the smoke and shadow of the hall. Lyah heard the sickening sounds of combat, the snapping of bone, the brutal thud of a body hitting the stone floor, and the king's inhuman roar of fury. A second later, he returned, standing in the broken doorway, his chest heaving, his king scent now overlaid with the sharp, coppery tang of fresh blood. Not his own. His eyes found hers, and the king mind was gone. Only the wolf remained, primal and terrified. "They came for you. They saw your weakness, your scent trail, and they came to take my mate." The realization of the near loss, of the threat to his hidden claim, sent the king into a terrifying emotional freefall. His iron control fractured. He crossed the distance between them in a single, silent stride, caging her body between his own and the wall. "Mine," he whispered, the word a desperate, broken sound. "You are mine." He crushed his mouth onto hers, a desperate, punishing kiss that was all the rage, fear, and possessiveness of his wild nature. This was no gentle exploration. It was a hungry, brutal claim. His teeth dragged along her lower lip, not enough to break the skin, but enough to send a jolt of pain and, inexplicably, a shocking, responsive heat through her body. Lyah whimpered, but the sound was consumed by his mouth, his tongue sweeping inside, demanding, conquering. She was drowning in the primal, heady mix of his scent, the blood, the iron, the sheer masculine power, and her own frightened, intoxicating sweetness. Her hands, meant to push him away, tangled in the thick silk of his black hair, pulling him closer as the mate bond, free from the leash of his mind, pulled her into the current. The kiss was hot, wet, and utterly explicit in its intensity, a scene of raw, animal need. His large, rough hand slid down her spine, forcing her hips against his erection, a hard, unyielding weight that testified to his immediate, all-consuming need. He growled, the sound vibrating from his chest into hers, and the fear in Lyah melted, replaced by a devastating, primal submission to his power and his will. She was an Omega, a creature born to obey, and her body was now betraying her soul, welcoming the dominance of her king. He broke the kiss, his breathing ragged, his eyes slits of molten gold. "They will not touch you again," he promised, his voice a low, gravelly threat aimed at the unseen world. "I will burn this kingdom to the ground before I let anyone separate my wolf from its mate." He was not talking to her. He was talking to his wolf and to the shadows. He left her breathless and shaking, the lingering, shocking heat of his touch and the taste of his primal passion and new, terrifying reality. The suspense had paid off in a burst of devastating drama, forcing the king to finally touch the mate he fought so hard to deny. Lyah knew then that her life was no longer her own. It was tied to the violent, unpredictable passions of the ruthless king. Chapter 4. The Whisper of Treason and Ron's Warning. The morning after the attack on the Obsidian Tower was steeped in a tense, unnatural calm. King Derek had left Lyah untouched, yet entirely undone. The raw intimacy of their kiss had branded her, leaving a dull, sensual ache in its wake that was both terrifying and utterly captivating. Ron, whose injuries were significant but not fatal, a testament to his beta strength, was back on guard duty, a visible bruise darkening his jaw. He watched Lyah with a quiet, paternal concern that was far removed from the cold professionalism of the other palace staff. Derek arrived in the late afternoon, his king scent having been used to scour the castle of any lingering rogue scents, making the air thick with his demanding presence. He was composed, the ruthlessness back in his eyes, but a subtle tremor in his powerful hands was a sign of the struggle within. He was meticulously dressed, every inch the unshakable sovereign. "The northern rogues are bolder than I anticipated," Derek stated, pacing the room. "The attack was a message, but they used an insider. Someone knew you were here, Lyah, and someone wanted you dead before you could be questioned." Lyah watched him, her heart thrumming. Did he see who it was? Derek stopped, turning a severe, golden gaze on her. He saw a masked guard, someone from the inner circle. The scent was masked with the same chemical the rogues use. "The treason is deep, Lyah, and it's because of you." He didn't say it with blame, but with a chilling, declarative honesty. Her low status made her the perfect weak link to exploit. A few hours later, in the dead of night, Derek left the tower for a critical meeting, leaving Ron to stand solitary guard. Ron stepped inside, his movements heavy. "Lyah." He kept his voice low, his eyes fixed on the door's peephole. "The king is distracted. He is ruthless, yes, but he's also honest in his rage. He will hunt down who did this." "I know," Lyah whispered, "but the king's lie, calling me a prisoner, it was a beacon. Everyone knows an Omega with information is a temporary pawn." Ron nodded, his expression grim. "That's why you need to understand the true danger. It's not just the rogues. It's Beta-Elite Kaelen. She has influence with the council, and she has a fierce, burning ambition to be Luna." Lyah gasped, the name sending a cold rush down her spine. Kaelen's assessment yesterday had been a threat, not a question. Kaelen believes a Luna must be of a noble, high-ranking bloodline to secure the kingdom. Ron continued. "She sees the king's choice of a mate, any mate, as a weakness she can exploit. You, an Omega, are not just a weakness. You are an affront to the Pack's very traditions. If Derek tries to claim you, he risks a civil war. He risks his throne." The suspense was suddenly palpable, a political drama layered over the raw, primal romance. Lyah wasn't just a girl who had stumbled upon the king's heart. She was a catalyst for a war. Her fear returned, but it was no longer for herself. It was for the terrifying, complicated man who had claimed her with a desperate kiss. "What am I supposed to do?" she pleaded, her voice barely audible. Ron sighed, rubbing the thick knot of muscle in his neck. "Survive, Lyah. You have the one thing no one else has, the king's primal, undisputed protection. Use it. Do not give him reason to use his king mind over his wolf. His wolf wants you alive, claimed, and safe." As Ron left, the simple task of getting water from a pitcher on the table suddenly became a mission. Lyah picked it up and froze. A fine, almost invisible dust shimmered on the rim of the pitcher, a tasteless, odorless substance that Ron's heightened senses had likely missed through the haze of Derek's scent and his own pain. Someone had tried to poison her, not with violence, but with quiet, calculated malice. The threat was a tangible, terrifying reality, confirming everything Ron had said. When Derek returned, he found Lyah sitting by the pitcher, her hands trembling, but her face set in a pale, determined mask. She pointed to the water. "Look." Derek took one sniff, his eyes narrowing to golden slits. His wolf instinct was immediate and absolute. He didn't need a lab test. The faint, bittersweet aroma of the poison was enough. The king stood tall, his powerful body radiating a silent, cold fury that was more devastating than any shout. His control was absolute now, but it was the quiet control of a devastating storm. He did not ask who. He did not rage. He did not even look at Lyah, except to ensure she was untouched. He simply walked to the window, staring out at the slumbering, treacherous city below. "Ron will be relieved of his duties for missing this," he stated, his voice low, chillingly devoid of mercy. "And the one who did this will not see the next full moon." The drama had reached its fever pitch. Lyah realized that the ruthlessness of the king was now her shield, but it was a shield drenched in the blood he was about to spill. The moment he left the tower, silent and lethal, she knew the hunt had begun. The only thing worse than King Derek's rage was King Derek's terrifying, calm retribution. He was doing this for her, and the sheer magnitude of his protective violence left her both terrified and utterly enthralled. Chapter 5. Primal Claim. The castle was silent, an eerie calm after the poison attempt. Derek's cold fury had manifested as a relentless purge. 2 guards were missing. A minor council member had been stripped of his lands. The message was clear: harm the Omega and face the king's unyielding wrath. Lyah spent the day in a state of suspended animation, the knowledge of the failed assassination and the memory of Derek's savage kiss warring within her. She knew she was the core of his conflict, the vulnerability he couldn't afford. The political machinations were closing in, demanding a choice. That evening, the choice was forced. The heavy, granite doors to the Obsidian Tower were thrown open, and it wasn't Derek or Ron who entered, but Kaelen, flanked by 2 heavily armed guards. Her silver armor gleamed in the candlelight, and her gray eyes were colder than ice. "The king's interrogation of you has been deemed a political liability, Omega," Kaelen announced, her voice a precise, deadly weapon. "The council has voted. You are to be transferred to the central dungeons for a formal trial." Lyah knew trial meant execution. Kaelen was making her move, capitalizing on the political fallout of the rogue attack and the king's uncharacteristic secrecy. She was forcing Derek's hand. Choose the throne, or choose the Omega. "The king himself placed me here," Lyah stated, trying to mimic the calm she had witnessed in him, but her voice trembled. "You are defying his command." Kaelen smiled, a thin, cruel slash across her beautiful face. "The king is absent, dealing with the unrest your presence has caused. I am acting on behalf of the pack's stability. You are coming with us." Just as Kaelen's guards reached out to grab Lyah, the air pressure in the room plummeted. The scent of iron and ozone exploded, a soundless, terrifying declaration of a presence that transcended simple authority. It was the king's scent, a terrifying wave of primal dominance that hit the room like a physical shockwave. Derek stood in the doorway, his chest bare, his trousers torn, his body slick with the sweat and grime of a recent, brutal shift. He wasn't in his king's robes. He was in the half-shifted state of a warrior on the edge of utter transformation, a massive, terrifying creature of man and beast, his muscles corded, his canines slightly elongated, and his eyes were pure, molten gold, fixed with singular, murderous intent on Kaelen. "Kaelen." Derek's voice was a low, inhuman growl, a sound of pure predatory menace. "You overstep your authority." Kaelen, for the first time, showed a flicker of fear, but her ambition was stronger. "My king, I act for the good of the pack. This creature," she spat the word, "threatens everything. You cannot let an Orphan Omega sit as your Luna. The traditions." "To hell with tradition," Derek roared, a sound that shook the stone walls. His king mind, his discipline, and his political calculation all dissolved in the face of the threat to his mate. The wolf had won. He moved on Kaelen's guards first. It was a blur of brutal, efficient violence. He didn't use a sword. He used his fists and his primal strength. The guards were tossed aside like broken dolls, one collapsing with a sickening crunch, the other fleeing in terror. Kaelen drew a blade, her face pale. "I have the council's decree, my king. This is treason if you—" Derek ignored her. He took one step, two, until he was in front of Lyah, his breath hot and ragged against her skin. He grabbed her by the hips, pulling her roughly against his muscular frame, the contact immediate, desperate, and explicit. "You speak of tradition and law." Derek's voice was a chilling whisper, his eyes locking on Kaelen's. "I am the law, and this is the tradition." He buried his face in the sensitive juncture of Lyah's neck and shoulder. She gasped, her hands instinctively clutching his back as the primal heat of his body enveloped her. The scent of his rage, his sweat, and his absolute, unyielding desire was intoxicating. The king's elongated teeth sank into the soft skin of her neck. Lyah's scream was a sharp, pain-filled sound, instantly muffled by the sheer, devastating pleasure that erupted as his venomous, burning alpha essence flooded her system. The pain was eclipsed by a wave of raw, mind-shattering ecstasy that coursed through her, connecting her to his wolf, their souls fusing in a torrent of primal need. Her body arched, a silent, all-consuming moan escaping her lips as the mate bond, raw and absolute, cemented itself. Derek pulled back, his mouth smeared with a drop of Lyah's blood, his eyes glowing with satisfaction and ownership. The mark, a dark, blossoming circle on her pale skin, was starkly visible. He had claimed her. "She is Luna," Derek declared, his voice ringing with terrifying finality, his tone a mix of king and conquering warrior. "She is mine. Any move against her is a declaration of war against the Crimson Moon Kingdom. Leave Kaelen, and tell the council their king has made his choice." Kaelen stood frozen, the blade slipping from her numb fingers, staring at the newly formed mark of the king. The ruthless king, who thought he could never fall for anyone, had just committed political suicide for an Orphan Omega. Derek turned his full, terrifying attention to Lyah, now a creature of the pack hierarchy's highest rank, marked and claimed. He picked her up, her body shaking with the aftershocks of the bond, and carried her to his bed. This was not the end of the conflict. It was the beginning of the real war. The steamy, dramatic climax had cemented their fate, and the suspenseful implications of his dangerous, rebellious choice were about to consume them both. Chapter 6. The Weight of the Mark. The shock of the mate mark was a sensory overload, a white-hot fusion of pain and the most profound, devastating pleasure Lyah had ever known. She felt her entire being, her timid Omega soul, her fierce orphan spirit, snap into alignment with the colossal, consuming presence of the king. He was not just Derek. He was her alpha, her purpose, the core of her new, terrifying existence. Derek, having thrown Kaelen's guard to the wind, carried her to the massive, ornate bed, his breathing ragged, his body trembling with the aftershocks of the bond claim. He was no longer the composed king. He was a primal, desperate beast who had finally, violently, secured his most precious treasure. His eyes, still molten gold, were fixed on the new, raw bite mark on her neck, the visual proof of his defiance. "Mine," he ground out again, his voice thick with a guttural, possessive hunger that was far more dangerous than his political rage. He lowered her onto the silk sheets, following her down, caging her small frame beneath the sheer, overwhelming mass of his body. The scent of her fear and the heady sweetness of her mate scent drove his wolf to the brink of insanity. He kissed her again, but this time, the kiss was not punishing. It was an exploration fueled by the deep, magnetic current of the new bond. His mouth was scorching, his tongue tasting the faint traces of her own blood from the mark. This was the language of the mate bond, spoken in heat, need, and an absolute lack of restraint. He tore the threadbare tunic from her body, his rough hands leaving trails of fire on her skin, and she arched beneath him, no longer fighting, but responding with a desperate, instinctive pull. "Look at me, Luna," he commanded, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. The title, the weight of her new rank, felt like a physical garment of power. Lyah opened her wet, wide eyes, meeting the feral hunger in his. She saw the conflict in the depths of that gold, the king's fury at his own loss of control, and the alpha's ecstatic relief at having found his soul's complement. He didn't take time for tenderness. The bond was a raging fire, demanding consummation, demanding the final, utter fusion of their beings. He was a force of nature, driven by the raw, animalistic imperative to solidify his claim. He entered her with a powerful thrust, a dominating move that stole the breath from her lungs and elicited a cry that was pure, unrestrained submission. The physical pain was instantaneous, sharp, and quickly subsumed by a wave of shattering, bond-fueled pleasure that felt like coming home. He moved with a fierce, dominating rhythm, his body a symphony of lethal strength and desperate need. He growled into the hollow of her neck, his teeth gently scraping the still tender mark, reinforcing the claim, pouring his essence and his power into her. Lyah was a whirlwind of sensation, her body clinging to his, her small hands clawing his powerful back, leaving red tracks in the frenzy of their union. She was an Omega no more. She was the Luna, and her submission was her power. The moment he came, a wave of pure king power slammed into her, overwhelming her with visions of his kingdom, his struggle, and his terrifying, all-consuming love. It wasn't the gentle emotion of a lesser wolf. It was the possessive, violent, life-or-death protection of an apex predator. He collapsed onto her, heavy, breathing hard, his body slick with sweat. His scent, now permanently intertwined with hers by the bond, was an intoxicating mixture of oak, iron, and a new, startling vulnerability. "You are mine," he repeated, not as a threat, but as a prayer. "And anyone who touches what is mine will face a king's wrath that will make the last 10 years look like a lullaby." The act was complete, the physical reality of their bond established. But as the fire cooled, the cold weight of his choice settled. He looked at the mess he had made, the shattered window, the beaten guards, the political ruin he now faced, and then at the young, vulnerable Luna in his arms. The king had secured his mate, but the man had just sentenced them both to a life of perpetual danger and conflict. The steamy passion had served the drama, but the suspense was only just beginning. Chapter 7. The cold dawn of consequences. The morning brought no respite. Derek woke before Lyah, his powerful frame now dressed in a simple tunic, pacing the chamber like a caged beast. The moment he had claimed her, the bond had opened a channel between them, a terrifying link that allowed Lyah to feel the crushing weight of his king burden, the political anxiety, the cold calculation, and the relentless, agonizing need to protect her. Lyah lay watching him, the mark throbbing on her neck, a physical link to his soul. She was no longer just his weakness. She was now his greatest strength, but also the most volatile liability he had ever taken on. The first consequence arrived in the form of Ron, who entered with a pronounced limp and a face etched with weary loyalty. "My king," Ron said, his voice respectful but tense. "Kaelen is demanding an emergency council meeting. The formal charges of instability and defiance of tradition are being prepared. She's claiming you are compromised by the Omega's low bloodline." Derek stopped his pacing, his eyes cold and severe. "Kaelen is a viper. She has played her hand, and I will crush it." He walked to Ron, his hand resting briefly on the Beta's shoulder. "I am sorry I doubted you, Ron. Your loyalty is absolute. I am promoting you to commander of the Royal Guard. Secure this tower. Double the perimeter. Only Ron and I are to enter. If Kaelen tries to petition the council to remove Lyah again, she will not leave the chamber alive." He turned to Lyah. "You are still confined. The public cannot know the king has a Luna who was—" He paused, struggling with the word. "An Omega. Not yet. We need time to consolidate the loyalists. Your mark is a declaration to the elite, but to the pack, you are still the prisoner I was questioning." His words were cold, pragmatic, and sliced through the residual heat of their night together, reinstating the distance. The steamy intimacy was a necessity of the bond, but the political reality was a freezing cage. Later that afternoon, a subtle, perfumed box was delivered to the tower. Ron inspected it thoroughly before handing it to Lyah. Inside, nested on crimson velvet, was a necklace of polished, rare moonstone. It was beautiful, deceptively simple, and deeply unsettling. Attached was a small, elegant card, bearing the insignia of the Beta-Elite. It simply read, "A gift for the king's new possession. May your stay be brief. K. Lyah felt a surge of cold terror. It was not just a threat. It was a psychological weapon. A reminder that Kaelen saw her as a temporary plaything, not a permanent Luna. She clutched the necklace, stone cold against her palm. A wave of intense, furious concentration suddenly washed over her. It was Derek, focusing his alpha mind on the intricacies of a treaty draft in his office far below. Lyah gasped, the sudden influx of his thoughts dizzying. The bond was strengthening, and she was not just feeling his emotions. She was getting glimpses of his actions. She focused, fighting the dizzying pull, and saw him, cold, hard, and terrifyingly focused, signing papers, his brow furrowed with intense calculation. She could feel the pressure of his alpha power, the sheer force of his will, and a deep, underlying current of possessive anxiety for her. The suspense tightened its coil. Lyah wasn't just in danger from the outside. She was now inextricably linked to the king's mental battlefield. She had a window into his ruthless world, but it was a window that also allowed the enemy to find a target. The king had given her his mate Mark, but the cost was an existence perpetually on the edge of political and personal collapse. She crushed the elegant note, her resolve hardening. She would not be his brief possession. Chapter 8. The Alpha's Lesson. Lyah's fear had begun to curdle into a fierce, protective instinct. She could sense Derek's stress, his weariness from the endless battles waged on her behalf. She was determined not to be the helpless Omega who brought down a kingdom. She confronted him that evening as he arrived, his expression rigid with the tension of a day spent managing treasonous whispers. "I need to be trained," she stated, her voice surprisingly steady. "I can't defend myself, I can't control the bond, and I won't be a liability." Derek stopped, his eyes running over her small frame, then settling on the mark on her neck. A grudging respect flickered in his gold gaze. "A mate should not need to fight, Lyah. That is the Alpha's duty." "And when your Alpha duty takes you away?" she challenged. "I nearly drank poison because I was an ignorant Omega. I am a Luna now. You're Luna. Teach me how to be worthy of your defense." His lip curled into a possessive, dangerous smile. "Very well. But you are not Omega, and you are not Beta. You are mate. Your power is in the bond, in your submission to and command of my wolf. It is an internal battle." He led her to a rarely used, padded training room deep in the castle's hidden underbelly, a place scented only with cold stone and centuries of sweat. He locked the door, and the air immediately grew thick with charged anticipation. "Today you learn control," he announced, stripping off his tunic, revealing the sculpted, powerful landscape of his torso. The sight of his raw, aggressive masculinity made her mouth go dry, the bond already reacting with a sharp, insistent pull. "Focus on my scent," he commanded, his voice deep and resonant. "It is your anchor. Find the edge of the bond. Now try to suppress your own scent." Lyah concentrated, trying to push her sweet, vulnerable scent inward, but her fear, magnified by his closeness, only made it bloom brighter. Derek moved quickly, his body a blur of muscle and purpose. He slammed his body against hers, caging her to the wall, his erection pressing hard and explicit against her belly. His lips descended to her neck, his teeth gently scraping the edge of her mate Mark, sending a devastating jolt of heat through her. "Wrong," he growled, the primal proximity driving his wolf to the surface. "Your fear is my power. I can take anything I want from you, Lyah. You must learn to channel that submission, not suppress it." The lesson was intensely physical, designed to push her to the breaking point of emotional and sexual awareness. Every touch was both a command and a caress. He forced her to confront the absolute dominance of his alpha presence, demanding she surrender not out of weakness, but out of the powerful, willing submission of a Luna to her alpha. He ran his hand down her side, cupping her hip, pulling her into a dizzying grind that left her gasping. "The bond reacts to dominance," he whispered, his scent overwhelming her senses. "If you allow the world to dominate you, they will kill you. If you allow me to dominate you, you become untouchable. Surrender, Luna. Now." The forced intimacy, the heavy, demanding sexual charge of the Alpha, was meant to shock her into control. She cried out, not in pain, but in a surge of overwhelming, bond-induced arousal, and in that moment of absolute surrender, her own internal power snapped into place. Her scent dimmed, becoming almost undetectable, replaced by a subtle, command-laced version of Derek's own iron aroma. "Good," he murmured, his breath hot, rewarding her with a deep, consuming kiss. The lesson was effective, but the consequence was that the line between training and claiming had completely blurred. As they stood, breathless and trembling, Lyah felt a sudden, sharp spike of anger from Derek, distant and controlled, but palpable. Through the bond, she saw a fleeting image, Kaelen, speaking to a group of solemn, older wolves, her face set in a look of triumphant conspiracy. The bloodline elders refused to recognize the claim. "The time for a vote is now." Lyah gasped, realizing the true gravity of the threat. The council was moving faster than Derek anticipated. She was not just learning to fight. She was learning that the war was already at their gates. Chapter 9. The Council's Ultimatum. The call for the emergency council meeting was delivered by a neutral Beta Herald, a formal declaration that could not be dismissed. Derek, now aware of Kaelen's success in swaying the bloodline elders, dressed in his most formidable king's regalia, heavy black velvet and silver accents, a king preparing for brutal siege. He looked at Lyah before leaving. Her face was pale, but the mark was a dark promise on her neck, and her newly harnessed scent control made her an enigma of quiet power. "I have to go to face the Vipers," he told her, his voice devoid of warmth. "If I do not return within the hour, Ron has his orders. You will be escorted to the northern sanctuary. Do not question him. Do not hesitate." The council chamber was filled with the ancient, musty scent of tradition and the sharp, anxious scent of high-stakes political drama. Kaelen stood at the head of the floor, facing the elders, her silver-edged armor a symbol of martial law, not diplomacy. "King Derek's actions are unprecedented," Kaelen proclaimed, her voice ringing with feigned indignation. "He has chosen a Luna from the lowest possible rank, an Orphan Omega, and kept her hidden as a prisoner, not a queen. This is a clear sign of instability, of a heart compromised by a base, biological compulsion. We cannot risk our pack's survival on a king whose judgment is clouded by a whim." The murmurs of the council were a chorus of agreement. The elders, staunch traditionalists, looked on with disapproval. They believed the Luna should be the purest, strongest bloodline to ensure the Alpha King's power. Derek entered, not with a roar, but with a silent, devastating stillness that commanded immediate silence. He took his seat on the throne, radiating pure, unadulterated Alpha authority. "I have heard the treacherous bleating of your argument, Beta Kaelen," Derek said, his voice level, his eyes like chips of glacial gold. "You mistake my personal choice for political instability. I claim my mate as is my right, as the Alpha of this pack." "Your right is contingent on your stability," an elderly elder snapped. "You break every custom. If this Luna is worthy, then present her. If you cannot prove her worth, then the bloodlines must choose a new Luna candidate, or the king must step down." The ultimatum hung heavy in the air, a sword of Damocles. The crowd held its breath. The suspense was almost unbearable. Derek leaned forward, resting his chin on a gloved hand. The choice was agonizing: present Lyah and expose her to immediate danger, or lose the throne and plunge the kingdom into chaos, likely resulting in Kaelen's ascension and Lyah's certain death. The king mind weighed the variables, but the wolf mate overruled it. "Very well," Derek conceded, his voice a dangerous whisper. "You wish to see my Luna, to assess her worth? I will present her publicly at the Great Hall, under the next full moon, 3 nights from now. She will stand by my side, and you will see her claim, not on my heart, but on my kingdom's survival." Kaelen's eyes flashed with triumph. She had forced the king's hand, dragging his Omega into the dangerous public arena, where her low birth would be scrutinized and condemned. "Until then," Derek finished, his voice rising to an echoing roar of Alpha command, "any further whisper of treason, any attempt to contact or threaten my mate, will be met with my personal, immediate, and utterly devastating wrath. Are we clear, Council? The subservient growls and nods were immediate. The king had bought himself 3 nights, but the cost was an immediate public unveiling. He was bringing the fight to the enemy, forcing Lyah to transition from a secret, terrified Omega into a visible, powerful Luna. The political drama was about to escalate into a full-scale, life-or-death performance. Derek rose, his expression grim. He had traded a secret battle for a public war. Chapter 10. The Unveiling and the Vulnerability. Derek returned to the tower radiating a tense, controlled storm. Lyah could feel the immense pressure of his decision through the bond, and she knew the weight of his promise. 3 nights. 3 nights to prepare for a public confrontation that could end with her execution or civil war. She met him with a quiet strength that surprised them both. I heard the Council's demands through the bond. I understand. They want to see the Omega fail. Derek pulled her into a possessive embrace, his muscles rigid. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling her unique scent, a desperate need for the comfort of his mate overriding the cold king's mask. I have made you a target, Lyah. A magnificent, dangerous target. Now I must make you a queen. The preparations began immediately. Expensive silks and fine jewels arrived. Tailors were called in, blindfolded and overseen by Ron, to create a gown befitting the Luna. The process was agonizingly intimate. One night before the unveiling, as Lyah stood in front of the mirror in a gown of midnight blue that matched Derek's mood, Ron stepped out to patrol the outer corridor. Derek dismissed the blindfolded maids and strode up behind her. He placed his powerful hands on her bare shoulders, his eyes meeting hers in the reflection. She looked terrified, luminous, and impossibly fragile. The contrast between her small size and the overwhelming power of her king was a potent, dramatic image. They will look for fear, Lyah. They will look for a common girl. Do not give them the satisfaction, he murmured, his voice a low, commanding rumble. He reached for the obsidian necklace Kaelen had sent. Picking it up, Lyah flinched. He tossed it into the nearest corner. You wear my marks, he declared. He produced a simple, heavy silver choker, set with a single, massive, flawed ruby. It was an ancient piece, worn by the first Lunas, a symbol of dominance and protective alpha power. He fastened it around her neck, the silver heavy and cold against her skin, the ruby lying perfectly over the fresh, dark clay mark. His breath was hot on her neck. He turned her to face him, his eyes blazing. He cupped her face, his gaze penetrating, demanding absolute attention. They will judge you by your rank, your birth, and your history, he ground out, pulling her hips against his, forcing her to feel the immediate, hard reality of his desire, a stark reminder of their private bond. I have claimed you, and that is the only history that matters. You are mine, Luna. I do this for the pack, but my wolf does this for us. The intimacy was raw and demanding the final, steamy moment of private claiming before the public exposure. He kissed her deeply, possessive, punishing kiss that was a fusion of kingly desperation and alpha need. His hands swept over her body, memorizing the feel of her under the silk. He needed to be inside her, to pour his scent and his strength into her one last time before he gave her to the wolves. The morning of the full moon arrived. The castle was alive with silent tension. Lyah, pale but resolute, stood ready. Derek, an imposing figure of lethal power, led her from the Obsidian Tower. As they stepped onto the balcony overlooking the Great Hall, a temporary, imposing platform built for the ceremony, the noise of the gathered wolves below, over 20,000 pack members, hit her like a physical force. The sound was a confusing wave of disbelief, anger, and shocked silence. Lyah could see their faces, the sheer disbelief of the common pack members, the cold fury of the aristocrats, and in the front row, Beta-Elite Kaelen, her expression a mask of calculating malice, already plotting the downfall of the king's scandalous choice. Derek gripped Lyah's hand, the silver ring on his thumb digging into her skin, a grounding pain. He raised his free hand, demanding silence. He did not introduce her with warmth. He introduced her with absolute power. Behold your Luna, his voice thundered, cutting through the silence. Chosen by the Alpha, marked by the king. She is the soul of this kingdom, and the price of touching her is absolute annihilation. Lyah stood tall, a beacon of fragile determination in the massive gown, the ruby gleaming over her mark. The king had exposed his greatest vulnerability. The suspense was unbearable, for they both knew that from this moment on, they were at war with the very traditions and politics of the kingdom. Lyah had survived the shadows, but the light was a far more dangerous place to stand. Chapter 11. The Scrutiny of the Full Moon. The silence that followed King Derek's declaration was deeper and more chilling than any roar. Lyah felt the crushing, thousand-eyed weight of the pack's scrutiny. They didn't see a Luna. They saw a low-born Omega in a stolen gown, a physical insult to their noble traditions. The air was a volatile mix of reverence for the king and sheer, unadulterated contempt for her. In the front row, Kaelen's expression was an exquisite blend of fury and calculated composure. The Beta-Elite didn't need to shout. Her silent, cold assessment was more damning than any public protest. She subtly turned, speaking a few clipped words to the bloodline elders near her. Lyah didn't need the bond to know the conversation was about her immediate removal. Derek felt it all. The bond, now a searing, open channel between them, pulsed with his violent, suppressed rage. He wanted to leap from the balcony and tear the throat out of every wolf who dared to disrespect his mate. But the king mind held him, a leash of iron self-control. He kept his hand locked around Lyah's, pulling her slightly behind him, subtly shielding her from the worst of the visual assault. "Hold my presence," he murmured, his breath brushing her ear, the words a raw command only she could hear. "Breathe in the iron, Lyah. Let it be your armor." The ceremony continued in a frozen state of tension. Derek gave a brief, sharp speech, outlining new laws and crackdowns on rogue activities, all designed to remind the pack of his relentless authority. But every word was aimed at reinforcing one terrifying truth. His power was absolute, and he would use it to protect his Luna. As the pack slowly began to disperse, the nobility refusing to approach the balcony to pay their respects, Kaelen finally made her move. She stepped forward, her armor shining, her gray eyes locked on Lyah's face. "My king." Kaelen's voice was smooth, carrying effortlessly across the now quiet square. "The pack accepts the Alpha's right to claim, but the Luna must be capable of governance and tradition. The bloodline elders demand a formal assessment before a full endorsement, for the stability of the kingdom." It was a perfectly delivered political challenge, not a rejection of the mate bond, but questioning of the Luna's competency. Derek's eyes narrowed, pure molten gold. "The mate is the Alpha's extension. Her worth is my mark." "Perhaps," Kaelen countered, bowing deeply, a sly triumph in her voice. "But even the Alpha King must respect the ancient laws of the bloodline. Prove her capable, my king, or the law will find its own, more worthy candidate." Derek didn't dignify the remark with a direct reply. He simply swept Lyah up into his arms, right there on the public balcony, in a gesture of blatant, possessive ownership. He carried her back into the fortress, his scent exploding around them, a statement to the pack that his Luna's safety and comfort were his immediate priority, regardless of their traditions. Back in the Obsidian Tower, the relief of escaping the public eye was immense. Derek set her down, but his control had finally snapped. He was a creature of raw, frustrated power, having been forced to restrain his wolf for hours. "They will not touch you," he growled, ripping the confining ceremonial clothes from his body, his movements fast and violent. He caged her against the cold stone wall, his large hands gripping her hips, his body radiating a desperate, possessive heat. The public exposure had only intensified his need to mark her, to reaffirm their bond in the most primal, unquestionable way. He was not asking, he was claiming. He drove into her, a powerful, commanding thrust that stole her breath. The pain of the intrusion was immediately overwhelmed by the fierce, bond-fueled pleasure. "You are not a political pawn, Lyah," he snarled, burying his face in the soft crook of her neck, his teeth gently scraping the mate mark. "You are my mate. My queen. My life. Feel that truth. The act was brutal, urgent, and devastatingly intimate, a desperate attempt to drown the whispers of treason in the sound of their combined pleasure. Lyah clung to him, meeting his intensity with a raw, willing submission, her fear replaced by the ecstatic, bond-driven need to be claimed, owned, and protected by her Alpha King. The weight of the kingdom fell away, leaving only the terrifying, all-consuming passion of their illicit bond. Chapter 12, A Lesson in Command. The political firestorm that followed the unveiling was immediate. Letters of protest flooded the castle, and the bloodline elders formally scheduled the Luna assessment, a council interrogation designed to expose Lyah's lack of noble training and, ultimately, strip her of her title. It was set for 2 days away. Derek knew the enemy strategy. They couldn't attack his claim, so they would attack his Luna's competence. He abandoned all royal duties to focus solely on Lyah's training. The assessment is not about knowledge, Lyah, Derek explained, leading her to the training room again. It is about presence. The elders are betas and gammas, subservient to my alpha command. You must learn to channel my power, to command their instinct, not their reason. The training was no less intense than before, but the focus shifted from pure surrender to command. He stood opposite her, his powerful body radiating an intimidating wall of alpha dominance, challenging her to breach it. Suppress your Omega instinct, he commanded. Stop flinching. Hold eye contact. I am your alpha, but you are my Luna. You must use the bond to borrow my authority. Force me to feel your presence. Lyah tried, but the deeply ingrained Omega instinct to submit made her eyes drop and her shoulders slump. Frustration, mixed with a deep-seated alpha rage at her vulnerability, radiated from Derek. He surged forward, not hitting, but grabbing her, hauling her against his chest. You are not trying. Kaelen will tear you apart. They are vipers, and they will smell your fear and call you a fraud. He pushed her onto the padded mat, following her down, pinning her wrists over her head. He loomed, his face inches from hers, his eyes blazing gold. He was a frightening spectacle of controlled rage, a king pushing his mate to the limit to ensure her survival. Look at me, Luna, he growled. You are beautiful, you are mine, and you are terrified. Use the fear. Channel it into the bond. Now, show me your power. His body was heavy on hers, his hard erection pressing against her. The explicit contact meant to flood her with the bond's demanding power. It was a cruel, necessary strategy. He was dominating her not to take pleasure, but to force her survival mechanism to trigger. Lyah, in a blinding flash of desperate defiance, finally understood. She focused on the mark, on the wellspring of his power flowing into her. She stopped struggling against his weight, and instead focused her will on his scent. Suddenly, her own scent changed. The honey sweetness didn't vanish, but it was overlaid with a sharp, undeniable echo of iron and oak. A Beta Command scent. Derek's eyes widened, a flicker of shock crossing his face. His wolf, recognizing the borrowed authority of its mate, instantly loosened its grip. There, he breathed, his voice thick with a mix of pride and agonizing relief. You have command. You are more than an Omega. You are the mate of an Alpha King. Now maintain it. He didn't release her wrists, but he relaxed his weight, allowing her to feel the intimate heat of his body without the full force of his dominance. The training was over, but the passion, sparked by the extreme tension and the Alpha's pride, remained. He lowered his head, not for a lesson, but for a kiss that was a deep, guttural reward, a desperate entanglement of ownership and need. As they broke apart, Lyah felt the sudden, crushing weight of his focus through the bond. Kaelen is meeting with the elder, Lord Rylan. They are planning to use the ancient purity law at the assessment. The victory was fleeting. Lyah realized that the council was setting a trap, and her newfound command would be needed immediately to survive the political battlefield. Chapter 13, The Purity Law. The Luna assessment took place in a small, circular chamber, usually reserved for pact treaties. The atmosphere was stiflingly formal, scented with old parchment and the sour anxiety of the attending elders and council members. Derek stood rigid, a terrifying statue of a king, Lyah at his side, her hand locked in his. Kaelen was the chief prosecutor, her smile thin and venomous. She presented a series of questions designed to highlight Lyah's ignorance of history and protocol. Lyah, recalling Derek's training, relied on the bond, filtering his strength, standing tall, and answering with the minimum necessary words, projecting a quiet, steely command that unnerved her inquisitors. Finally, Kaelen struck. We have established that the alleged Luna is ignorant of basic pact governance. We shall now move to the matter of the purity law. A gasp ran through the room. The purity law was an archaic, almost never used decree stating that any Luna must have a pure, untainted bloodline, meaning no parents or grandparents of rogue status, regardless of their own Omega rank. The punishment for a tarnished bloodline was immediate execution for the offender and temporary abdication for the king who claimed her. Elder Rylan, please present the evidence, Kaelen announced, triumph glittering in her eyes. An ancient, frail elder shuffled forward, holding a yellowed scroll. Our records show that the Luna Lyah, whose parents were killed on the eastern border, is the grandchild of a female werewolf named Muriel, who was banished from the Central Pact 50 years ago for rogue sympathy and died in the wild. This constitutes a taint of the bloodline. The purity law demands her immediate removal and trial. The room erupted into shocked whispers. This was the trap, a hidden, historical technicality that only the elders would possess. Lyah felt the blood drain from her face. Her past, something she couldn't control, was about to be her death sentence. Derek's control shattered. His eyes flared, his king scent exploded, and a low, murderous growl vibrated through the chamber. The law is a weapon for the living, not a shroud for the dead, he roared, his hand instinctively gripping the hilt of his ceremonial sword. But before he could act, Lyah squeezed his hand. She projected a single, clear thought through the bond. Wait, let me fight this. She stepped forward, taking her place directly in front of the assembled wolves, her small frame utterly dwarfed by the massive chamber. The silver choker glinted over the mate mark. My parents were loyal pact members, killed defending the border, Lyah said, her voice surprisingly steady, the command sense she had learned still clinging to her. My grandmother was banished not for being a rogue, but for sympathy for those suffering in the wilds. She was a gamma healer who broke a minor law to treat an injured werewolf. This is an indictment of your cruel traditions, not my bloodline. She looked directly at Elder Rylan, channeling all of Derek's alpha confidence. The purity law was created to stop rogues from infiltrating our rule. It was not meant to punish compassion. The king claimed me because my heart, though humble, is pure, and my alpha's law overrides your archaic sympathy clause. It was a masterful, dangerous interpretation, delivered with a conviction that was entirely Derek's channeled strength. The elders were stunned into silence. Kaelen's face twisted in silent rage. Derek watched his Luna, his heart, the part of him he thought was frozen forever, swelling with the terrifying pride. She had faced the law and turned it back on them. That night, back in the tower, the emotional toll of the trial was a physical weight. Derek didn't rage. He didn't command. He simply looked at Lyah, his eyes soft with a vulnerability she had never seen. You risked everything, he whispered, pulling her into an embrace that was more tender than anything he had shown her. You are more king than I am. Lyah wept, the suppressed fear finally breaking. He carried her to the bed, stripping away the confining clothes with gentle reverence. He made love to her not with the dominating urgency of the alpha, but with the profound, worshipping tenderness of a king who had found his soulmate. The act was slow, deep, and utterly steamy, a complete emotional release that forged their bond beyond political power, into the core of shared vulnerability. He was thanking her, cherishing her, and confirming that the law was now entirely subservient to their love. Chapter 14. The Whispers of a Weakness. Lyah's defiance had bought them time, but it hadn't enraged Kaelen. The Beta-Elite understood that she could not defeat Lyah through laws or customs. She needed a chink in the king's own formidable armor. 2 days later, the bond between Derek and Lyah, now a constant flow of thoughts and emotions, became a painful channel. Lyah felt a crushing wave of guilt, shame, and self-recrimination radiating from Derek as he stood, alone, in his private study. She slipped away from Ron, who was exhausted from the relentless security shifts, and found Derek. He was hunched over a collection of ancient, forbidden scrolls, his face etched with a dark, suffocating despair she had never seen. "Derek," she whispered, approaching him. He flinched, snapping his head up, his eyes a tormented gold. "Go back, Lyah. This is not for you." "The bond screams otherwise," she insisted, placing her hand gently on his rigid shoulder. "What is it? What did Kaelen find?" He sighed, a deep, shuddering sound, and finally succumbed to the comforting touch of his mate. He leaned into her, burying his face in her stomach, his body shaking. The ruthless king was gone, replaced by a man crippled by a private, ancient wound. "Kaelen has found the king's weakness," he confessed, his voice muffled against her silk dressing gown. "Not you. Me. 20 years ago, the rogues first attacked our eastern border. I was a young prince, sent to observe. I was arrogant. I misjudged the threat. I pulled the troops back too soon to preserve my reputation." He pulled away, his eyes full of self-hatred. "My orders led to the death of over 1,000 pack members. Ron's sister was one of them. I silenced the records. I buried the guilt to become the ruthless, cold king they demanded. Kaelen has found a surviving document. She plans to expose it at the next public gathering, the annual remembrance feast. The ruthless king is a fraud built on 1,000 graves." Lyah was stunned. The core of his identity, the iron will and cold logic, was a shield for a devastating failure. The suspense wasn't about her life anymore. It was about the exposure of the king's deepest vulnerability, a political nuclear option that would shatter the pack's faith in him and lead to his immediate abdication or assassination. Lyah didn't hesitate. She cupped his face, forcing his gold eyes to meet hers. "That king made a mistake. That king was a boy. The king I mated is a man who is willing to start a civil war to protect the weak. You are not a fraud. You are human, ruthless only in your desire to never fail again." She kissed him, a deep, passionate exploration of shared pain and absolute trust. She took the initiative, pushing him back onto his study chair, straddling his lap, her body molding to his. The bond flared, and for the first time, she was the one commanding the intimate act, pouring her forgiveness and faith directly into his soul. She pushed his clothes from his shoulders, exposing the thick, scarred muscle of his back. She pressed her lips to the deepest scar near his shoulder blade, a wound from the same conflict, a physical mark of the guilt he carried. "This is not a weakness," she whispered, rocking against his powerful erection, the grinding friction building a desperate, agonizing heat. "This is a memory. I am your mate. Let me carry the memory with you." The lovemaking was fierce, a validation of his tormented soul. He flipped them, taking her beneath him on the desk, scattering the ancient scrolls, his body a symphony of need and desperation. The steamy scene was a desperate act of emotional repair, fusing their souls with a vulnerability that defied his public image. The ruthless king had allowed his mate to see, and to heal, his greatest weakness. He finished with a muffled, desperate cry against her neck, his body shaking with the force of his release and the emotional exposure. The plot had twisted. Lyah was no longer the sole source of danger. She was his only salvation from Kaelen's ultimate political weapon. Chapter 15. The Treacherous Transfer. The discovery of the hidden documents forced Derek's hand. He could not risk the public exposure of his past failure at the Remembrance Feast. He decided to send Lyah immediately to the Northern Sanctuary, a fortified, hidden citadel deep in the mountains, under the pretext of lunar preparations. This was the safest place he knew, but the journey itself was a high-stakes, dramatic risk. "I cannot face the pack without you, Luna," he admitted, his eyes dark with the strain of his decision. "But I cannot fight Kaelen and keep you safe here. Ron will lead the escort. They are the most loyal betas. Lyah, dressed in simple travel leathers, accepted the plan with quiet dread. The bond thrummed with Derek's anxiety, but also with his resolute planning. The transfer was scheduled for the dead of night. Derek walked with Lyah through the hidden, underground tunnels. Only separating from her at the final exit were Ron and 4 loyal guards waited with armored carriages. The final goodbye was agonizing. Derek crushed her against him, a kiss that was a deep, steamy promise of his return. Stay safe. Do not let them find you. The moment Kaelen exposes the past, the kingdom will be destabilized. The only hope for a unified pack is for you to survive and return as a true Luna. As the carriages sped away from the castle, their path winding through the dark, shadowed forest, the suspense was thick enough to choke on. Lyah sat rigid, her hand on the silver ruby choker, the bond her only lifeline to her king. Suddenly, a massive, explosive flash of white light erupted ahead, followed by a shower of sparks and the horrifying sound of the lead carriage screeching to a halt. Ambush! Ron roared, drawing his sword. They were waiting for us. Take cover. The woods came alive with masked figures, not rogues, but palace guards in civilian clothes, commanded by a high-ranking Beta Lyah recognized from the council meetings. Kaelen's allies had set a devastating trap, knowing exactly when and where the transfer would take place. Treason was everywhere. Ron and the loyal guards fought with ferocity, but they were outnumbered. Lyah was dragged from the carriage, helpless against the Beta who grabbed her. The king is compromised. The Omega dies tonight, the Beta screamed, dragging her into the shadows. Just as the Beta raised his blade, a sound echoed through the woods that was not human, not wolf, but something ancient, powerful, and utterly terrifying. It was King Derek's alpha roar, a sonic boom of pure, unadulterated primal fury that shattered the silence and caused every wolf, friend and enemy, to drop to their knees, clutching their ears. Derek burst into the clearing, not in his half-shifted state, but as the full, massive form of the Crimson Moon Alpha King. His fur was black as midnight, his eyes twin torches of molten gold, and his size was immense, a creature of myth made terrifyingly real. He had tracked them, ignoring the political fallout, choosing to fight for his mate. He moved with the speed of a striking viper, his massive claws finding the Beta who held Lyah. There was a sickening, tearing sound, and the man dropped, his blood instantly scenting the air. Derek turned to Lyah, his powerful head low, his eyes fixed on her. The raw, terrifying drama of his full shift was his ultimate act of vulnerability and power. He was no longer the king. He was the Alpha, and he was here to destroy anyone who touched his mate. He nudged her, a surprisingly gentle movement, then turned to face the remaining, terrified assassins. The fight was on, a primal, violent battle to save the Luna and to keep the secret of the king's weakness contained. Chapter 16. The Alpha's Fury and the Scent of Betrayal. The clearing became a slaughterhouse. King Derek, fully shifted into his Alpha form, was a magnificent, terrifying engine of destruction. The assassins, professional guards though they were utterly unprepared for the sheer, uncontrolled power of an enraged Alpha King. His movements were a blur of black fur, sharp teeth, and lethal claws. They had planned for a king on a throne. They got a primal beast in their midst. Lyah, huddled near Ron, who was desperately trying to stop the bleeding from a deep wound, watched in a mixture of awe and horror. The bond was a torrent of raw, violent protectiveness, flooding her with the Alpha's absolute focus. Kill the threat. Secure the mate. Every strike, every death blow, was a violent act of love. Within minutes, the ambush was neutralized. The loyal guards were injured, but alive. The assassins were broken bodies, their blood soaking the earth. Derek, the crimson scent of the fight, clinging to his fur, returned to Lyah. He nudged her gently again, his massive head low, a soft, questioning sound in his throat. Lyah reached up, her trembling hands burying themselves in the thick, black fur of his neck. I'm safe, Alpha. Thank you. The acknowledgement, the word Alpha, sent a visible shudder through his massive body. His wolf was soothed, its primal objective achieved. With a roar that was half pain, half relief, Derek shifted back, collapsing to his knees, his human form appearing in a sudden, vulnerable flash of nudity and sweat. He was instantly back in king mode, though his face was pale with exhaustion. "Ron, can you ride?" "Yes, my king." "Barely. Continue the transfer. The sanctuary is the only place. I will deal with the aftermath here." He focused on a single dead Beta officer, whose high-ranking insignia was unmistakable. This was Kaelen's closest ally. They are closing the circle. Lyah, knowing that Derek had to remain behind to manage the political fallout and the cover-up of the night's slaughter, accepted the necessary separation. Their final, hasty embrace was a silent promise. The remaining carriages sped off, leaving Derek alone in the bloody clearing with the corpses and the rising sun. The moment they were gone, Lyah felt a sudden, sharp spike of triumph and contempt through the bond, an unfamiliar, foreign thought that was quickly suppressed. It was Kaelen's scent, a sharp, metallic thread of pleasure at the ambush, and it was too close, too strong. Lyah looked at Ron, his face contorted in pain and exhaustion. She glanced at the driver, a quiet, innocuous Beta she had barely noticed. He was driving with a strange, unnatural alertness, his scent masked by the heavy fear of the night's violence. Lyah's newly sharpened senses, tuned to betrayal and survival, suddenly registered a terrifying truth. The Beta driver's hands, gripped tightly on the reins, had the faint, unique scent of the same masking chemical used by the assassins and the rogues. The ambush was not the end of the trap. The trap was still moving. "Stop the carriage," Lyah commanded, channeling her Luna command, her voice surprisingly strong. The driver hesitated, a second too long. Ron, his instincts honed by years of service, caught the movement. "Who are you?" Ron demanded, already drawing his sidearm. The driver lunged, not for Ron, but for Lyah. He was Kaelen's final, devastating move. A sleeper agent, tasked not with killing her in the ambush, but with delivering her alive to an unknown, final location. Chapter 17. The Captive Queen. The ensuing struggle in the carriage was short and brutal. Ron, despite his injury, was a formidable warrior, but the Beta agent was fueled by fanatical zeal. Ron took another blow, falling unconscious against the carriage wall. The Beta agent quickly secured Lyah with thick, leather restraints, pulling them tight, his face a mask of cold satisfaction. "You won't be going to the sanctuary, Luna," he sneered, his voice now stripped of its friendly facade. "You're going to the old keep. Kaelen is waiting for you. Once the king is compromised by the truth of his past, Kaelen will present you, alive, as the cause of his downfall. A tainted Omega who forced a powerful Alpha to choose weakness over his people." Lyah, feeling the terror, did not scream. She focused on the bond, sending a single, urgent spike of danger. "Captured. Old keep." To Derek, miles away, who was likely shifting back and managing the chaos of the clearing. The journey was long, ending in a ruined, ancient stone fortress, smelling of decay and secrets. Lyah was dragged into a deep, subterranean dungeon. Waiting for her, seated on a makeshift throne of carved stone, was Kaelen, magnificent in her silver armor, her eyes glowing with absolute triumph. "Welcome, Luna," Kaelen purred, rising. "Such a pity your king was so predictable. He would never allow his mate to die in an ambush, but he will allow the throne to be forced from him if his mate is held as a hostage." Kaelen walked slowly around Lyah, examining her. "You are more than I expected. You have spirit, but spirit cannot defeat tradition and political calculation. Your king's greatest failure will be exposed tomorrow at the feast, plunging the pack into chaos. He will be forced to abdicate to restore order, and I will be forced to step in." Lyah, tied and powerless, found her voice. "The king will never abdicate. He will burn the kingdom down before he lets you take his throne." Kaelen laughed, a harsh, brutal sound. "That is why you are here. He is willing to fight a civil war for his throne, but he will surrender his throne to save his mate's life. He will come for you, and when he is here, at his most vulnerable, I will present him with the choice. Abdicate, or watch your tainted mate die a traitor's death. The ultimate suspense was laid bare. Kaelen's plan was not about murder, but a forced abdication. A dramatic political coup that used the mate bond as the weapon. Lyah was not just a hostage. She was the king's undoing. As Kaelen left, locking the heavy iron door, Lyah was left alone in the cold dark. She focused all her will on the bond, sending a torrent of images. The cold stone, the unique smell of the old keep's decay, and the absolute certainty of Kaelen's intent. She knew Derek would be coming, but she had to find a way to dismantle the trap from the inside. Chapter 18, The Alpha's Arrival. The bond was now a desperate, two-way street. Derek felt the initial spike of danger, followed by the chilling certainty of the capture and location. He felt Lyah's fear, but also her resolute defiance. His king mind was screaming for caution, for a strategic counsel, but his alpha wolf was a living furnace of primal need, demanding immediate rescue. He didn't hesitate. He mounted the fastest horse and rode until the creature collapsed, then shifted and ran the rest of the way, his alpha form covering the distance with impossible speed, following the faint scent trail of Kaelen's agent and the desperate pull of his mate. He arrived at the old keep just before dawn, his massive black form crashing through the outer defense line like a cannonball. The few guards stationed there scattered or were instantly dispatched. He returned to his human form, naked and lethal, dressed only in the aura of his absolute fury. He tore through the crumbling halls, guided only by the strengthening pulse of the bond, the unique scent of his mate, and the underlying, metallic tang of Kaelen's pride. He found the dungeon entrance, a heavy iron door sealed with an ancient lock. The king's muscles screamed for the full shift, but he knew the noise would alert Kaelen. He used his immense strength to rip the hinges from the wall, the heavy iron falling with a deafening clang that echoed through the fortress. He found Lyah, tied to the wall, her eyes wide with relief and terror. The sight of her, vulnerable and bound, nearly shattered his control. He moved to her in a flash, tearing the leather restraints with his bare hands, his touch surprisingly gentle as he checked her for injuries. "I told you to be safe," he growled, the king's words laced with the alpha's possessive despair. Lyah clung to him, inhaling his scent, his solid, terrifying presence, a shield against the cold. "Kaelen is waiting. She wants to trade my life for your throne. She has the evidence of your past failure." Just then, a wave of cool, calculating scent washed over them. Kaelen stood at the dungeon entrance, flanked by 20 armed, loyal guards, her silver armor gleaming. She was smiling, an expression of pure, triumphant malice. "A romantic rescue, my king," Kaelen mocked, her voice carrying easily. "Predictable. You came for the Omega. Now the game is over. Present me with the formal, notarized abdication, or I present the pack with the truth of your massacre and the death of your mate." Derek rose, a formidable figure, shielding Lyah with his body. The king had been cornered, his weakness exposed, his only advantage, his mate's survival, now the instrument of his downfall. The dramatic tension was at its breaking point. Chapter 19, The Ultimate Choice and the Unbreakable Bond. The stalemate was complete. Kaelen held the political weapon and the physical advantage. Derek held Lyah and the absolute power of the Alpha King. "You mistake my weakness, Kaelen," Derek said, his voice a low, cold threat. "My failure was in prioritizing my reputation over the lives of my pack. My mistake now would be prioritizing my throne over the life of my mate." He looked at Kaelen, his eyes blazing with the horrifying resolve. "You can kill her. You can expose my past. You can have the throne and plunge the pack into a civil war you will never control. But my last act as king will be to see you suffer. I will not abdicate." Kaelen's confidence wavered. She had counted on his self-preservation, but the Alpha's love was a deeper, more destructive force. "You choose the Omega over your people," she hissed, raising a hand to signal her guards. "Treason." Just as the guards moved, Lyah acted. She pushed out of Derek's embrace, stepping forward. "The king does not choose. I choose," Lyah declared, her voice ringing with the full, commanding force of a Luna who had accepted her fate. She looked directly at Kaelen, projecting her borrowed, alpha-laced scent. Beta Kaelen, you claim to act for the pack's stability. If you kill the Luna, the king will destroy the pack in his rage. Your ambition is the true threat. I offer a different choice. Lyah placed her hand on the silver ruby choker, directly over the mate mark, and focused on the hidden document Kaelen held, the record of Derek's failure. You want the truth to be exposed. Let it be exposed by me. Lyah continued, her eyes fixed on the shocked faces of Kaelen's guards. The king is ruthless because he learned from a grave mistake, a mistake that killed 1,000 wolves. The king carries the guilt of 1,000 lives he failed to save. I, his mate, offer the pack his full confession and my full endorsement of his rule because of his remorse. He is not a compromised man. He is a king who has already paid the price of his greatest failure. Lyah's confession was a political masterstroke, a preemptive strike that stole Kaelen's thunder. It turned Derek's weakness into a sign of his deep, agonizing integrity. Kaelen, seeing the plan crumble, shrieked, "Silence her! Kill her now!" The guards hesitated. They were loyal to Kaelen, but Lyah's powerful speech, her sheer courage, and the powerful, commanding echo of the Alpha Kings sent radiating from her had caused a momentary, fatal hesitation. In that split second, Derek moved. He was a black flash, a devastating force of alpha power. He didn't use his claws. He used his training, his hands striking with deadly precision, taking out the key guards and pinning Kaelen against the stone. "You lost the moment you touched my mate," Derek whispered, his voice dangerously low. He didn't kill her. He simply disarmed her, shattered the bones of her dominant hand, and threw her against the wall like a discarded doll. He then turned, his full focus on Lyah. The political drama was over. The only thing left was the raw, emotional aftermath. He pulled her to him, his mouth finding hers in a deep, grateful, and utterly steamy kiss that spoke of relief, victory, and utter, soul-deep love. Chapter 20. The Reign of the Ruthless Luna. The dramatic confrontation at the old keep was a political earthquake. Kaelen, publicly defeated and physically crippled, was stripped of her title and exiled. Her conspiracy, exposed by the king's confession, subtly managed by Lyah's public gambit, was viewed as an opportunistic betrayal rather than a noble attempt to uphold tradition. The ruthlessness of the king was now accepted as a necessity, and his mate's courage was hailed as the true sign of a worthy Luna. The king and his Luna returned to the castle not in triumph, but with quiet, absolute authority. The pack was silenced, the council chastened, and the threat of civil war averted. That night, alone in the Obsidian Tower, the mate bond was a river of peace and profound intimacy. Derek held Lyah against him, the silver choker, her symbol of political survival, lying on the bedside table. "You saved me, Luna," Derek murmured into her hair, his body heavy and warm, entwined with hers beneath the silk sheets. "You turned my greatest shame into my greatest strength. You were right. You are more king than I am." Lyah turned to him, her eyes shining with the knowledge of his soul. "We are one, Alpha. Your ruthlessness protects the pack. My courage protects your heart. I am your strength where you fear to be vulnerable." He smiled, a rare, genuine expression that melted the granite of his soul. He had thought he could never fall for anyone. That love was a weakness. He had thought himself immune to the gentle chaos of a mate. He had been profoundly, beautifully wrong. He had not fallen. He had been redeemed. His hands moved over her body, the touch no longer urgent or dominating, but languid, deep, and utterly possessive. He made love to her slowly, reverently, worshipping the body that had endured so much fear, and the soul that had shown him the meaning of true strength. The act was steamy, explicit, and saturated with the profound love and absolute trust forged in the crucible of battle. The ruthless king thought he could never fall for anyone, until he came across an Orphan Omega. He discovered that the greatest power was not the throne, but the unbreakable bond with his mate. Lyah, the Orphan Omega, now the ruthless Luna, ruled by his side. She was his secret weapon, his soul's keeper, and the very embodiment of his power. They ruled together, the ruthless king and his courageous Luna, their shared destiny forged in the fires of treason, terror, and an all-consuming, undeniable passion. Their reign was absolute, their love the terrifying, beautiful foundation of a newly unified kingdom, secure under the shadow of the crimson moon.